Are you immediately gonna start like giving that water that you make to people, or like what are you gonna do with the pilot?
Good question. So on Caja de Muertos, which is like this, it's like a park, I want to call it a national, national park. It's a park wildlife refuge off of Ponce. And actually, the name means Coffin Island, which is kind of cool. It looks like a coffin when you look at it from Ponce. It's really neat. Beautiful place, but they have no water right now. So they collect rainwater that they can use for like showering and things, but it's not potable, which means you can't drink it. So what they do is they bring all of their water with them, and the only people that live out there are about 10 park rangers that live out there full time, and they're on a week-long rotation, so they have to bring all their water with them for the rotation. We're going to put this buoy out there and literally start pumping water in a tank for them, and it's going to be hooked up to their water infrastructure that goes into their houses and stuff like that, so they can turn a faucet and start using the water. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So how do third world countries feed and stuff pay for the soda? Are they
That's a fantastic question. That's a really good. All right, so that's great. So you're right. A lot of these places don't have a whole lot of money to afford things like this, especially new technologies. So what we're planning to do from a business perspective is we're going to start by catering to well, I'll start by saying our pilot projects are things that we're either going to pay for by crowdfunding, or we're going to pay for it by working with, we're in the Colorado Haiti Project right now, which is a nonprofit aid organization to help get these fresh pilot projects in place. And that's aid organizations will be absolutely critical in helping finance these projects. Because the system that makes 5,000 gallons a day is probably going to be about $35,000, which in the grand scheme of things is really cheap, especially when you factor in the cost of electricity that you're saving. But for a small village, they don't have $35,000. So our plan as a business is to start out by selling to island resorts and things like that. Especially there are a number of eco-friendly resorts we've talked to that would love to put this basically on their menu of eco-friendly amenities that can appeal to their eco-friendly tourists. We'll start with them, and then that'll actually give us a viable business that's self-sustaining, I guess you could say, in order to prove the technology. Once the technology is proven, then we start leading more aid organizations to help get these to places. So World Water, USAID, places like that, these organizations are nonprofits, so they're generally more hesitant to spend money on new technologies that don't have a proven track record, because if it screws up, the people that give them money regularly are going to lose trust in them and stop funding them. So we have to prove ourselves before we can start working with aid organizations. But the aid organizations are how we're going to get these things to those less developed places. We've also thought about a nonprofit structure. So this needs a lot more thinking, but Tom's Shoes, how when they sell a pair of shoes, they give a pair to somebody that needs them. We've thought about things like that. And obviously it wouldn't be we sell a SARS buoy, we give a SARS buoy to somebody else. We'd more sell 20 SARS buoys and we give a SARS buoy to someone else or something like that, just because they're a lot more expensive than a pair of shoes to make. But that's another thing we've thought about as well. Yeah?
So would you bottle this water and stuff like that after you made it?
No. We would put this into a cistern, and then we would, I shouldn't just jump so quickly and say no. We would not bottle the water. If somebody wants to put the water in a bottle, if they need to get it to a place that maybe they don't have a pipe running to, they could do that. But essentially, our work is going to, at least in the beginning, is going to stop once the water gets into the tank. We'll put the water into a cistern, and then many places, not all places, it really depends on the place, I guess is a better way to answer this. Some places have pretty developed distribution systems for the water, so here, you can put it in a water tower and it just comes out of your faucet when you turn the valve. Some places are going to need to transport the water to their homes and places like that because they don't have pipes running through their house. So it really depends on where it goes. But we won't actually be bottling water and then selling bottles.
Oh.
We're a machine that makes water, and then whatever comes out of the hose, they can do what they need to with it, yes. Yeah? It could be, yeah. So like I said, it really depends on the place. It could be literally a tank in the center of a village, and people will walk up there and have almost like a beer tap or something that they use to fill up a jug of water. It could be literally just right to their house into a distribution system. It really depends. That guy on St. Croix I was telling you about, he's got it right plugged into his distribution system. So he's got a holding tank, and then he's got a solar-powered pump, which is pretty cool, that just maintains water pressure. It turns on a faucet, it just runs out of the tank and into his house. So it really depends on what the people that are using it have in place.
Are you going to cover how much it can make per day, or is that very
That's something I always forget to cover, yeah. So the prototype that you guys saw, that picture that was on the presentation and the one that's in the video, the buoy's about this big around, and that's designed to make about 400 or 500 gallons in 2-foot waves. So, and that's a day, 400 or 500 gallons a day in 2-foot waves. As the waves get bigger, obviously, so 4-foot waves, that just about doubles. So now we're making about 800 gallons a day with that same system. But what's cool about this latest design is that it scales really favorably. So if we make the buoy, we take it from 5 feet diameter to 6 feet diameter, all of a sudden we can go from 500 gallons a day to like 3,500 gallons a day in the same waves. So there will be a point at which, can I draw here?
Yeah.
There will be a point at which like the buoy is going to get so large that it won't work right, and that's what we're studying right now. We have a grant with the University of Colima in Mexico to study this. But say these are waves. These are really pretty perfect waves. I wish waves really looked like this in real life. Eventually, our buoy, right now, it sits on top of a wave and then it drops into the trough of a wave. But eventually the buoy could become so big that it starts to just like sit across 2 crests of a wave and like straddle a wave. And when that happens, we made the buoy too big. So we need to make it smaller, and then then you can group them together in an array. Just like you'd see like a wind farm, you never see, well, I can't say never, but rarely do you see like one wind turbine in a field. There's a whole bunch of them. You never see one solar panel on someone's roof. You probably won't see one, depending on how much water people need, you probably won't see one Saros buoy in a town. You'll probably have a group of them making water. Yes?
I have a question. So if it was like made almost like flexible to go with the waves, would it be made bigger?
It could, but that's a different type of wave energy device. And when we get to the wave energy section, we'll go over that. There are a bunch of different cool designs that are out there. Yeah?
So does that mean like just like how in 2-foot waves it makes like certain output, like if you're having a really person like in a lot of waves, a lot of like choppy waves, would it make more water?
It would.
Or-
So yeah, it would definitely make, the bigger the wave, in theory, the bigger the wave, the more water it's going to make. Because there's just more energy in a bigger wave. The more this buoy moves up and down, the more water we make. Hurricanes, what will likely happen is the system is going to be designed, just because it would be really expensive to build in this extra capacity into the system. The system would be designed to probably plateau at a certain wave height, so say 10 or 12 feet is probably where it maxes out the capacity of these membranes, these filters, and they just can't accept any more flow unless you were to put another one in there. And because you rarely see those conditions, it might not make sense from a cost perspective to put another one in there. So what will happen then is just extra water pressure is just going to be pulling off like out of a valve. Basically, it would be like a safety valve that just purges extra pressure. So most of the water flow will be going into the membranes, but anything that is too much for these membranes to handle is just going to get blasted back out into the ocean. Good question. Desalination time? Alright, so 97% of the water in the world is in the oceans. That's a whole lot of water. There's like a ton, I googled like the other day, it's surprising I just did this the other day, but googled how much water is in the oceans, and there was this number that's just like, you can't even say it. It's got like a whole bunch of like decimal places and exponents. It's just ridiculous. There's so much water in the oceans. And maybe not here, but in a lot of places, water is like a super scarce thing. Why not pull water from this like unlimited supply we have from the oceans? And the answer is because it takes a whole lot of energy to do that. So if we can use waves to do it for us, we can probably have really good access to this kind of water in a lot of places. So 97% of the ocean, or of the world, water is oceans, in the oceans. 2%, a little over 2% is locked up in ice caps and glaciers, and about less than 1% is available fresh water. So less than 1% of all the water in the world is something that is fresh water, not even drinkable water necessarily, but like something in a lake, So there's a whole lot of ocean water out there, and there's not a whole lot of fresh water. I don't know, I'm not even going to talk about that next one because that doesn't really apply. It's groundwater, but I guess there's a tiny bit of water in lakes, swamps, and rivers. A lot of groundwater. Let's skip that. This is Huntington Beach. I thought this was a cool picture. You got some guys catching some waves, and then you have this big desal plant in the background. This is in California. That's what a large-scale desalination plant looks like. I think that this is a thermal desalination plant, which we'll talk about a little bit, judging by the stacks that are on here, unless that's a power plant. A lot of times they build desalination plants next to power plants, which is actually pretty cool because, say a power plant is already there, it needs to be there. A perfect example would be like the one in Southport, the nuclear power plant in Brunswick. It generates a whole lot of heat, and that's kind of like a byproduct. And if you've ever been in Southport and you've seen those canals that kind of run through Southport, like there's a couple bridges where you're going to like cross over this weird like really straight canal, if anybody's ever seen that. And what that is that the power plant sucks in river water, uses the river water to cool the plant, and then this warmer water then comes out of the plant, and they run it through these canals to let it kind of cool down a little bit, then they pump it out offshore out in front of Oak Island. And that's just what needs to happen for a power plant right now. They need to take out, it's called residual heat removal. Desalination, there's a few ways you can desalinate water. You can use this membrane, or you can just simply boil water. And if you could use that waste heat from a power plant to boil water, it's a pretty cool use of it, because otherwise it's just something you're going to throw away. So a lot of times we see power plants built right next to desalination plants, and the desal plants will use the waste heat. It's the same way they, like in the Navy on submarines, they have nuclear submarines, they'll use the heat from the reactor to run a distillation system which boils water, and that's how they make water for themselves on submarines. So there are three main types of desalination: thermal, mechanical, and then electrical ion exchange. Thermal is really simple. Thermal is just you're boiling water, and you get like steam, right? That's water vapor that comes off. So think you're making ramen, and you lift up the lid of the pot, and there's all those like water droplets on the lid. That's all like really clean water. And if you can collect that really clean water, you can drink it. So that's how thermal desalination works. By basically boiling water and collecting the vapor. You can also use vacuum distillation, which, did you know you can boil water at room temperature? Does anybody know how? What's that? Yeah, reverse pressure. So like vacuum. So if I were to take her bottle of water right here, and I were to hook a vacuum pump up to it, this thing would probably crush before this happened, but this water could just start to boil right here at the table because you're taking out the air pressure that's pushing down on the water and kind of holding it all together, and the water will just kind of fall apart almost and boil right there at room temperature. That's a way that some people can desalinate water, by just basically hooking a vacuum up to a bunch of water, and then it boils at room temperature, and you collect the vapor, and you have water. Mechanical means these are basically membrane-based methods, which are like reverse osmosis, forward osmosis. This is a little weird, so ion exchange uses a membrane, but we'll pretend that's not there. But basically these mechanical means use a membrane. And I'm going to pass these around in a second, so the next slide shows how membranes work. And these membranes are essentially like molecular-sized filters, basically. So you have salt molecules, which are kind of big and bulky. Water molecules are a little smaller, and they're attached. Salt really likes to be with water, which is the reason it takes so much energy to separate them. And if you force really high-pressure seawater into this membrane, that pressure through reverse osmosis causes the salt bonds to be ripped, or the salt to be ripped apart from the water molecules, and water molecules can permeate through this membrane, and collects in the center as fresh water, and you get clean water out. So I'll get into more detail about that in a second. I'll pass these around. And then the last kind, which this is more of like a lab technology, I'd say, like lab scale experimental technology still at this point. I mean, there's some places that kind of use it, but electrical means could be ion exchange or electrodialysis, where salt has a charge. Salt is an ion, so if you put voltage in water, you can cause salt to kind of want to be over on this side of a vessel, a container, I guess you could say, and the fresh water stays on this side. So you can actually attract salt molecules away from water using electrical charge. Not super commonplace. Basically magic, yeah. That's what I've just said, like literally all those words I said, that's it. I don't know anything else about that one. So it's basically magic, and it's not super commonplace at this point. So reverse osmosis. Did you guys talk about like osmosis in biology? Yeah, so it's like how liquids permeate through a cell membrane, and it's because a liquid of higher concentration, if you have a liquid of high concentration, like here, there's a whole lot of stuff, we'll call it salt, in this side, and then you have low concentration, there's less salt on this side. This stuff these two concentrations want to even out just by osmotic pressure. So the salt wants to pass through this membrane and balance out the two solutions, and that's called osmotic pressure. And in the case of seawater, that's about 400 psi. So actually, just putting two different concentrations of water on either sides of the membrane, there's like 400 psi differential pressure in between that membrane that it's trying to keep the two apart. It's really crazy. So reverse osmosis is, as it sounds, the reverse of that. So if we have a lot of salt here on this side, say seawater, and we have fresh water here, and we have this membrane, and you push really hard with like 800 psi, you can overcome that 400 psi differential pressure that's trying to push everything the other way, and you can actually separate salts out in the reverse direction. So the easiest way to think about it is like molecular filtration, but it's chemically a little more advanced than that. And quite honestly, it's kind of over my head how the chemistry in this thing works. So this is a reverse osmosis membrane, so I'll pass these around. These are membranes, these are literally exactly what we found on like a yacht. So a lot of like high-end boats will have water makers, a lot of sailors that go out on like long trips, you know, they don't want to bring their water with them, they'll have water makers on board. These, I think this is a 150 gallon a day membrane. Each one of these are, so I'll pass these around if you guys want to see them. But what happens is you feed water into this, into one end of the membrane. There's these like holes here, this one's kind of wet, but there's holes here, you pack in a whole bunch of seawater into this side, and then water makes its way down the membrane. There's a spiral wound element, and then each of these spirals are different layers of membrane that fresh water is able to permeate through, and basically it's like a sandwich. So say that this is one leaf of a membrane. So fresh water passes through this membrane, and it actually makes it into the center of this layer. And then from the center of this layer, it actually spirals all the way around until it gets into the center tube. That's where the fresh water comes out. So if you were to hook this up to a real system, you put feed water, seawater in this end, you get your fresh water out of this end, and then out of these holes, you get your brine. So as the water passes, as the water enters here and it passes down the membrane, fresh water starts to seep out through these membrane leaves. And by the time that seawater gets to the end, a lot of the fresh water is gone. So this is where your salty water comes out. I forget what material the membranes are made out of, but essentially it's crazy how they make these things. You have a few different parts to the membrane. You have the actual membrane itself, which has a paper clip on it in this one. Then you have what are called feed spacers, which are like these meshy kind of materials. Feed channel spacer that's like mesh that allows the water to like kind of work its way around the membrane and cover membrane area. And then you have a permeate spacer, which is like kind of the pathway for permeate connection. It's a pathway between the two membrane sides that allows the clean water to travel through to the center tube of the membrane. So you guys can check these out as well if you want to see them.
Is that the size of the ones you have in the buoy?
The ones that we're going to be running in the latest buoy are 40 inches. I think it's just one. So these are 2.5 by 14-inch membranes. The ones we're going to be running in the latest one are 2.5 by 40. So it's the same diameter, but it's about 40 inches long.
Uh-huh.
How long is this thing? 36.
And how long
More
are
longer than this.
they good for?
If you treat them properly, they're good for about 5 years.
Oh, wow.
We're not going to treat them really great, just the way our system runs. We may get 3 years out of them. They're not super expensive, so those membranes right there are about $150. So if you can get 3 years out of $150, it makes economic sense still. And how you treat them well is you just remove a lot of the junk that's in seawater before you can get to the membrane. So we have pre-filters that remove sediment and things like that, plankton, whatever, you know, that, like sand before it gets into the membrane. Yeah.
So whenever the 3 years is up, do you replace all of them? Like all of the membranes and lines of it, or do you just get like
So the membranes, so on our system, the membranes are on land. The only thing that's out in the ocean is the pump, and that's kind of the engine for the process, which is cool because when you replace the membranes, you don't have to have a guy go out there with a boat to switch them out. But yeah, you just take 2 screws out, pop the cap off, and then those things slide out of this like tube, and you just swap new cartridges in.
So when you guys don't have like a certain like sewn model, but like how long are those like buoys good for? Like, are they good for like a long time? Or you have to
So each buoy is, good question, each buoy is designed, we're designing them to last about 10 years, and that's kind of like what we're basing the economics of the system around. That's because we need to know how long it will last in order to figure out how much our water costs basically, because if you have to replace the buoy halfway through it makes it more expensive. So our buoys are designed to last about 10 years, and they'll probably need like a biannual, like every 2-year kind of overhaul where you replace a couple components on it. Simple stuff. So we're making sure that we design the buoy so that it's like ultra simple. If the part doesn't need to be on the buoy, we're putting it on land. So the only things that are on the buoys, they're there because they need to be there, and anything that needs to be worked on can be fixed by anyone. That's really like a strong focus that we're trying to make sure with this. On the pre-filters, those would probably need to be replaced depending on the turbidity of the water, which means how stirred up and how much sediment is in the water. Those need to be replaced maybe every 3-ish months or something like that. Those cost like $2 for a whole new set. This is a large-scale desalination plant to kind of walk you through the process. So you have the ocean, and then you have intake tubes that suck in seawater. They go through like a strainer, which basically just removes like sticks and stuff like that, you know, so you're not sucking in like seagrass. and then they put that water into a settlement tank, or settling tank, which is just literally like it's like a swimming pool, where the water is just allowed to sit at very low current, and sediment just kind of falls out of suspension, so you get like this mud at the bottom of it. And every now and then you have to go in there with a bulldozer, drain it and hose it out, and you drain out all the sediment. But what that does is it allows just sand and stuff to fall out of it. Also, this is how a large-scale plant works. This isn't how, we don't have a settling tank in our system. Then from the settling tank, you run it through sand filters, which is just like a swimming pool would use. Then it goes into, these are diatomaceous surface filters. Not too many, I mean those aren't super common, but basically these things are to remove sediment from the seawater. Then it gets pumped over here to a really high pressure pump, goes through more filters, excuse me, and then into the reverse osmosis membrane. So a lot of plants you won't see one membrane. You won't see one membrane in a Carlsbad plant. I think they have like 20,000 membranes in that thing. It's crazy. So you'll see banks of membranes. The seawater goes into these membranes, and then it's separated out into freshwater. So these tubes are the freshwater that go into like a post-treatment and a holding tank. A post-treatment might be like it gets a little bit of chlorine. So like city water has a tiny bit of chlorine in it just to keep it sanitary. They may actually remineralize it in some cases. Sometimes reverse osmosis, if you run it right, or I guess if you run it long, the water can be so clean that it doesn't have any minerals or anything in it, and that can actually, they call that aggressive water. And what that means is that if you put it in a pipe, the water wants those minerals so bad it'll steal them from the pipe, and then the pipe will start to fall apart. And that's actually part of what happened in Flint, Michigan, with that water thing they had. They had water, they had mineral leaching, and then they tried to fix it by injecting this other chemical, and they put too much of this chemical or something like that, mess things up. But anyways, that's what post-treatment can look like, and then you got your fresh water here. But this is something cool that I wanted to mention. So this is called energy recovery. This is an energy recovery turbine. This is really sweet. So, like I said, you maybe have, of all the water that comes into the membrane, maybe 20% might come out as fresh water. 80% of it now is 800 psi seawater, that because it's at 800 psi, it still contains a lot of energy. And otherwise, you would just blast that back out into the ocean and waste that energy. What an energy recovery turbine does is it takes that high pressure exhaust, basically, that waste product, and it uses it to spin a turbine, which generally will help push this pump along in the beginning. So it helps, it uses the pressure that's still in like the waste product to help move along the pump that builds new pressure. So like recycles energy. Very similar, like if anyone knows how a turbocharger works in a car, it uses like waste exhaust gas to help pump new air into the engine. It's kind of the same thing for reverse osmosis. And with this, you can boost efficiency, like almost, you can quadruple, sometimes factors of 6 to increase your efficiency. We have energy recovery in our system, which is really, really sweet. So, all right, cool. How much time do we have left? 30 minutes?
Well,
Not quite?
not quite. Bell rings at 8:29 now.
Okay. Well, then we'll go right into ocean energy then, because this is really cool. It's probably my favorite part of the whole presentation. This is what ocean energy looks like. So you may look at the ocean, you may not think that like there's like energy in there, because a lot of people think energy is like electricity. But energy comes in all kinds of forms. You probably learn in like physics and things. You can have like thermal energy, electrical energy, you can have kinetic energy, potential energy. Energy is all these different weird forms. And in this case, that's energy. And that's just moving water. And think about like a hydroelectric dam, how they take moving water from a river and they turn that into, use it to spin a turbine and generate power. Kind of the same process with ocean energy, but they can use the motion of waves and tides in different ways to spin a generator or to move pumps and things like that. So there are 3 main types of ocean energy. Tidal, pretty self-explanatory. It uses the ebbing and flowing of the tides, basically, to generally they would spin like a turbine, like a wind turbine. So you think a wind turbine just uses air current to spin a big fan. You can use tidal current to spin an underwater fan and generate power. So it's really similar to like traditional hydropower. Wave energy uses the kinetic energy of ocean waves, the motion of ocean waves. That's what we use for our system. So waves are generally, the ocean's always moving, and there's kinetic energy there that you can harvest and put to work for you. And then there's ocean thermal energy conversion, or OTEC, which it generates energy based on the temperature differential. So you guys talked about like thermoclines, probably. I learned that word in third class. There's a big temperature differential between deep cold water and warm surface water. And believe it or not, there's actually a way to get energy out of that, which is also kind of like magic. And I'll go through that in a second too. So There's challenges to ocean energy. Obviously, I said the ocean energy industry is kind of in its infancy, and it's technology is still being developed. Just like we're out in front of Mason Bear Iron out wrinkles with our buoy, people are doing the same thing with their technology. So corrosion is an issue, storm survivability is an issue. There's biological things that are an issue, like the barnacles and the environmental impacts that need to be studied. Cost and economics, those are big issues right now because, so for like corrosion, if you can make everything out of stainless steel on your device, it would last forever. But that's really expensive. And if you make everything out of stainless steel and your machine's really expensive, there's no way that you're going to make, the power that you're generating is cost effective because your machine is just so ridiculously expensive to make that one. Predictability is one that people are working with. Predictability is an advantage to tides because tides are very predictable. Tides, come, do 4 tides a day, 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day, and they're really predictable. Like my watch will tell you what tide it is, and it's not like connected to Wi-Fi or anything. It's just because it knows what the tides are supposed to do. Where waves aren't very predictable, so waves are always changing. And that's a challenge because if somebody needs a lot of power and there's no waves, they have to find some other way to generate it. And then permitting in the unknown, that's kind of the thing I was talking about with, they just don't know the effects of some of these just yet. So, like I said, I doubt there are going to be any serious effects. People just don't know what any effects would be. So tidal power, I'll play this video. Take a breather. That's it. This is what your stereotypical like tidal power concept would look like. It's basically an underwater wind turbine.
Tidal power. Tidal power is a form of hydropower that converts the energy from the natural rise and fall of the tides into electricity. Tides are caused by the combined effects of gravitational forces exerted by the moon, the sun, and the rotation of the earth. Tidal plants can only be installed along coastlines. Coastlines often experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides on a daily basis. The difference in water levels must be at least 5 meters high to produce electricity. Tidal electricity can be created from several technologies, the main ones being tidal barrages, tidal fences, and tidal turbines. Tidal barrages are the most efficient tidal energy sources. A tidal barrage is a dam that utilizes the potential energy generated by the change in height between high and low tides. This energy turns a turbine or compresses air, which in turn creates electricity. Tidal fences are turbines that operate like giant turnstiles, whereas tidal turbines are similar to wind turbines, only underwater. In both cases, electricity is generated when the mechanical energy of tidal currents turns turbines connected to a generator. The generator produces electricity. Ocean currents generate relatively more energy than air currents because ocean water is 832 times more dense than air and therefore applies greater force on the turbines. Tidal power is easy to install and renewable, having no direct greenhouse gas emissions and a low environmental impact. Because the ocean's tidal patterns are well understood, tidal energy is a very predictable energy source, making it highly attractive for electrical grid management. This sets it apart from other renewables that can be more unpredictable. However, adoption of tidal technologies has been slow, and so far the amount of power generated using tidal power plants is very small. This is due largely to the very specific site requirements necessary to produce tidal electricity. Additionally, tide cycles do not always match the daily consumption patterns of electricity, and therefore do not provide sufficient capacity to satisfy demand. That's tidal power.
Tidal power. Do you still hear anything? Sorry, I probably blasted your eardrums out and turned down a tiny bit. So that's tidal power. It's very similar to wind, but it's kind of like underwater wind power. Like I said, an advantage is predictability. That has a huge advantage. I mean, economically, it actually makes a lot of sense because the way power grids work. I can explain that in a second. But the disadvantage to tidal is that they said it needs really specific site requirements. So here in Wrightsville, we have maybe a 6-foot tide. Would you agree? Something like that, or something like that? It really depends on the moon phase and stuff. So there are places like in the Caribbean that have a 6-inch tide. And so tidal power doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So places, I know a company that designed a tidal system in the Bay of Fundy.
I was going to say, but
Yeah. Which is just near the Bay of Fundy, so that's got like a 30-foot tidal,
50-foot
50-foot tidal range. So that's insane. So man, that's the one like where boats. Did you guys learn about that? Where like the boats will sit there and then all of a sudden they're 30 feet of water or whatever. So you can imagine there's just a lot of energy moving in and out of that bay. and they put a tidal installation at Bay of Fundy. But that's been the biggest drawback against a tidal, is that it's difficult to find the right conditions. You need a huge tidal range to make economic sense, and you also need like the right kind of geography. You know, it's nice to have a place that like kind of bottlenecks. Went too far. So that's tidal. No. What did I do? Okay. So this is ocean thermal energy conversion. This is the next. I feel like it's not skip a slide, but this is the next one we'll talk about. And this is the one that's kind of like magic. It uses the temperature differential found in the deep oceans and shallow oceans to generate power. So this one's kind of wild. So remember how I said like water can boil at room temperature if it's under a vacuum? Well, there are things that you could fill that water bottle with that would just boil away right now, even if there was no vacuum. So like ammonia byproducts are a good example, like refrigerant that's in air conditioners. This kind of works like, it shares very similar concepts with how like a refrigerator works, which is called vapor compression refrigeration, or like an air conditioning system in your car. It uses a fluid, so you see this purple loop here? This purple loop is filled with a fluid that will actually boil at room temperature. So like a refrigerant, like ammonia, things like that. And what they do is they use warm seawater. They use warm seawater and they pump this fluid through this warm heat exchanger, which causes the fluid to boil and expand, and it basically turns into ammonia steam, essentially. That ammonia steam runs through a turbine, and it spins the turbine to generate power, and then they take that warm, I don't want to say hot, but warm ammonia steam, and then they cool it down by using cold seawater that's pumped up from the deep ocean. And then that condenses it back down into a liquid, and then the cycle begins again where they pump that cooler ammonia back into a warm heat exchanger to boil it essentially, and then spin a turbine. This one's really cool. So I guess there's a plant in Hawaii, which I just learned about when I saw this video last night. But it's still not widely adopted as of yet. I think I'm gonna skip through a lot of this video. That's what the plant looks like. I really like these guys'
And
shirts.
energy, especially
They wear Hawaiian shirts.
to
I mean, it's
benefit mankind, being able to provide
This
more
company's
than
called Mackay
100%
Engineering.
total
They're in Hawaii.
energy needs of the planet,
Mackay
and be
Engineering.
able to do it with no carbon imprint is a worthwhile goal.
So
Fluids from mixing, separating the ammonia from the seawater.
this is a heat
So
exchanger,
now we're
which
at
is
the
basically
top
a
of the
radiator
heat
in your car,
exchangers that are
essentially.
called evaporators. What's coming out is high pressure ammonia vapor. So the warm seawater has gone into the heat exchanger and heated up that ammonia. It's boiled it. So now it becomes really high pressure steam. How do you boil a fluid with warm seawater? It's at room temperature. So how does it boil anything? And the answer to that is you pick a fluid that has a low boil